Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're here. If you're looking to really nail down the super segmental features of English pronunciation, well, you've hit the jackpot. Consider this your ultimate exam masterclass. Today, we're stepping way beyond just individual vowels and consonants. We're looking at the big picture, the features that operate over syllables, words, and honestly, entire sentences. So grab your notebook, get comfortable, and let's dive right in.
We've got a lot of ground to cover today. We'll start by demystifying stress and accent, then look at the levels of lexical stress, rules for suffixes, compounds, and stress shift, and finally, wrap it all up with the rhythm of English.
All right, part 1, demystifying stress and accent. Let's get into it.
To kick things off, we need to zoom all the way in on a single, microscopic syllable. You know, mixing up these next two terms is probably the absolute #1 trap on written exams, so we definitely need a rock-solid definition here. Stress is basically the degree of prominence you use when producing a syllable. In real life, that means using more energy, holding it a bit longer, and just putting more muscular effort into it. Think of the stressed syllable as the anchor of a word. It's that heavy beat that really grounds the whole thing.
Now, contrast that with accent. Accent is pitch prominence that's specifically tied to a stressed syllable. Now, I know they sound super similar, and they are closely related, but they definitely aren't the same thing. While stress is all about that muscular effort and rhythmic beat we just talked about, accent specifically involves a distinct movement, like a real noticeable change in pitch.
Honestly, understanding this exact difference is your perfect model for a short answer exam question. Stress is just rhythmic prominence. That's it. Accent, on the other hand, is rhythmic prominence plus pitch prominence. So here's the golden rule you'll want to jot down. All accented syllables are stressed, but not all stressed syllables are accented. Make sense? Basically, if a word has a heavy beat, it's stressed. But if that heavy beat also carries a pitch movement, boom, it becomes accented. Moving on to section 2, levels of lexical stress.
So let's zoom out just a tiny bit and see how native speakers actually apply these beats to individual words. Before we get into the exact levels, I want to give you a quick rule of thumb for predicting where a stress is going to fall. Strong syllables, ones that have long vowels, diphthongs, or N in a bunch of consonants, they naturally attract stress like a magnet. On the flip side, weak syllables actively avoid it. Heavy structure means it attracts stress, and light structure means it avoids it. Simple as that.
Now, English is beautifully complex because it actually distinguishes 4 completely distinct levels of stress. I'd highly recommend pausing for a second to memorize these 4 levels because it's an absolute lifesaver for multiple choice questions. At the very top, we have primary stress. This has both pitch and rhythmic prominence. It's your nuclear stress. Then there's secondary stress, which also has pitch and rhythm, but usually pops up right before the primary stress. Tertiary stress gives you that rhythmic beat, but totally drops the pitch prominence. And finally, unstressed syllables have neither. These are the weak links, usually just as schwa. For your exams, if you can just distinguish the main primary stress from the pre-primary secondary stress and those weak unstressed syllables, you are going to secure those points for sure.
All right, section 3, rules for suffixes.
Zooming out even further now, let's look at what happens when we start tacking grammatical endings onto our words. Suffixes are a huge deal for exams because they completely manipulate word stress. So, treat this next bit like a mental filing cabinet for your prep. Suffixes generally behave in one of 3 ways. They're either stress neutral, stress attracting, or stress fixing. Let's break down exactly how each one of those works.
First up, the stress neutral suffixes. As you could probably guess from the name, they do absolutely nothing to the stress of the base word. For example, take the word comfort. The main stress is right there on the first syllable. When we add the suffix, it's still comfortable. The stress just stays exactly where it was, completely unbothered by that neutral suffix.
Next, we have stress-attracting suffixes. I actually like to think of these as the greedy ones. They literally steal the primary stress all for themselves. So we start with Japan, right? But the second we add the suffix, that main stress jumps all the way to the end, Japanese. The suffix itself demands the heaviest beat. Another classic example of this is employ turning into employee.
And finally, we have stress-fixing suffixes. Now, these don't steal the stress for themselves, but they act kind of like a magnet, forcing the stress onto a very specific syllable right before the suffix. Take the word photograph. Stress is on the first syllable. But add that "ic" suffix, and it forces the stress to shift over, photographic. Suffixes like "ic," "eniati," and "ion" are your classic stress fixers.
which brings us to Section 4, Compounds and Stress Shift. Okay, this is where English pronunciation gets super sneaky. Getting the stress wrong here can totally change the meaning of what you're saying, sometimes with hilarious results. Take the compound word blackbird. The stress falls really heavily on that first element, which immediately tells a native speaker you're talking about a specific species of bird. But if you say blackbird as a phrase, the stress falls on the second element. That literally just means any bird that happens to be painted black. So, placing the beat in the right spot literally dictates the dictionary definition.
Now, let's talk about a really cool phenomenon called stress shift. See, English hates traffic jams. It strongly dislikes having two heavy primary beats crashing right into each other. Look at the word 13 on its own. The stress is hanging out at the end. But what happens when we put the heavily stressed word men right next to it? Well, to avoid a total rhythmic car crash, the stress on 13 actually jumps backward. It becomes 13 men. This stress shift creates a much smoother, alternating, regular rhythm.
Okay, let's take a quick breath here, because I want to throw a big question your way before we hit our final stretch. Think about everything we've just covered. The beats, the strong and weak syllables, the stress shifts. Why does English rhythm sound so radically, fundamentally different from languages like Spanish or French?
Let's find out in Section 5, the rhythm of English.
This brings us to our final, biggest zoom out, connecting all these words into fluent natural speech. You see, languages actually organize time differently. Syllable-timed languages like Spanish or French give roughly equal time to every single syllable. But English is a stress-time language. That means the time between stressed syllables tends to be regular. To keep that steady, metronome-like beat going, English has to heavily compress its unstressed weak syllables, just kind of squeezing them in between the main beats. And to make that stressed-timed rhythm actually work, English relies on a fundamental building block called the foot. A rhythmic foot always kicks off with a strong, stressed syllable, and then it sweeps up all the unstressed syllables that follow it, right up to, but not including, the next stressed syllable. It is basically the essential unit of measurement for spoken English. Let's see how this builds out in a real sentence. Step 1. Our first rhythmic foot starts with the stressed word man. Step 2. Our next foot starts with the stressed syllable gar. But watch what happens to the unstressed words was in the. Because English demands a totally steady beat between man and gar, those three little words get squeezed together and spoken super fast. The man was in the garden. It is the perfect proof of how unstressed words compress to serve the primary beats. Look, if you only remember one single sentence from this entire explainer to write down for your final exam, make it this beautifully concise rule. In English, rhythm is organized around stresses, not around syllables. I'm telling you that one single thought is the master key to everything we've unpacked today. We've zoomed all the way from the microscopic definition of a single stressed syllable out to the rhythmic feet that dictate fluent English speech. You've officially got the complete blueprint, so I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. How are you going to use this structured knowledge to conquer your oral exam and truly sound like a native speaker? Think about it, apply it to your practice, and I promise you, you're going to see incredible results. Thanks so much for learning with me today.